through transformative climate action. Each speaker will have the floor for 15 minutes, and we'll follow that with a few minutes of Q&A. And I've just got a few house rules to run through quickly. So first of all, if everyone selects speaker view, Sheridan will be pinning the presenter. And by selecting speaker view, that person will always appear on your screen. And it won't be Marjorie's dog or someone sneezing. We'll also be recording this meeting. So if you're meant to be at work and not here, feel free to put on some sort of disguise or alternatively turn your camera off. Thirdly, questions are encouraged. Whilst you will find yourself muted throughout the talks, you can still fire questions into the chat, and please do. I'll be trawling that chat throughout the session for questions and passing those on to the speakers following each of the talks. And then finally, if you are a scholar, if you could just take a minute to change your name on Zoom to your name and the year that you awarded your scholarship, it's always useful for us to see who's attending the events. So now I'll pass the pin on to Sam, the scholarship's own sustainability subject matter expert, to give some background on herself, provide a couple of minutes overview of the scholarship, and to introduce our first speaker. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Henry. That was a brilliant introduction. So yeah, hi, I'm Sam. I was awarded the scholarship back in 2019, along with Henry. We both went out in 2019. And for me, that meant a 3-month trip in the States researching the sustainability stories of 10 different cities. For those of you who haven't come across the scholarship before, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of what it is and about its history as well. But really, there's far too much to say in just a few minutes, so we really encourage you to have a look at our website, and we'll post that in the chat so you can explore at your own leisure. But briefly, so Nottingham Roosevelt Scholarship is a historic organisation that each year offers a unique and life-changing opportunity for people under the age of 35 in Nottinghamshire to visit the States for up to 3 months. It was founded in 1945 by the Lord Mayor of Nottingham, who was in talks with President-to-be Eisenhower, and together they wanted to commemorate the great services that Franklin D. Roosevelt had rendered to the UK, and they thought that rather than a conventional statue, it was much more fitting in honour of his life and achievements to create a living memorial, and that took the form of the Nottingham Roosevelt Scholarship. So since 1949, 180 young people have been sent out from Nottinghamshire to the States for a life-changing trip. So to win the scholarship, you have to propose a research project that will allow you to find and bring back specialist knowledge from America to make a positive impact in the county of Nottinghamshire. And planning and executing such a humongous trip, combining professional interviews and site visits and cultural immersion, is extremely challenging, but of course hugely rewarding and very beneficial to your personal development. Before, during and after, scholars have a massive amount of support from the Roosevelt Management Committee, which comprises entirely alumni. So Henry, Sheridan and I, we're all on the management committee, and that's part of our role, and we often refer to that group as a family because it really does feel like that. And as Henry mentioned, actually the whole reason that we're here today is because after our Thanksgiving event, Herbert, who went out in 1972, reached out to us wanting to discuss his net zero village project mission idea, and we had a fantastic conversation, and from that we really spied an opportunity to bring together more alumni who are interested in the field. And we had a fantastic kickoff meeting, really exciting, people from all walks of life and from the US as well as Nottingham and in various parts of the UK. And yeah, we kind of together formulated this idea of having a series of sustainability events with a different theme each time. This one's pretty general, but we're hoping to have some quite exciting topics in the future. And the USP is that there'll be both a UK perspective and a US perspective. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to our first speaker, Lillian Greenwood, MP for Nottingham South. Lillian has a long-standing interest in climate action and was an observer at the Climate Assembly of 2020. As chair of the Transport Committee, Lillian oversaw the publishing of the committee's reports on active travel and improving air quality. She's the founder and chair of the all-party parliamentary group on parks and green spaces. So Lillian, over to you to tell us about Nottingham's ambitious climate plans.
Well, thank you, Sam, for that introduction, and it's really great to be here. Now, I appreciate that this is for a public audience, and so there'll be some people who know loads about climate change, and certainly loads more than me. So for them, this is going to be sucking eggs. But I will just run through, you know, what is climate change? Why do we need to act on it? I hope that's what you wanted me to do, and then say a little tiny bit about the international perspective, the national perspective, and what's happening locally. So I hope that kind of works. Right, so I mean, obviously we know that the Earth's climate has fluctuated naturally in the past. There have been periods when it's been cooler and periods when it's been hotter, but temperatures are now rising faster than ever, and the last 5 years have been the hottest on record, and this the warmest on record, and this is linked to the greenhouse effect. So that's a good thing, that the Earth's atmosphere traps some of the sun's energy, and that prevents our planet from being so cold that we wouldn't be able to live on it. But scientists agree, and have agreed for some time, that human activity, and in particular burning fossil fuels for generating electricity, heating, transport, is producing carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. Those have added to that natural greenhouse effect, trapping more energy and causing temperatures to rise. And that temperature rise is having very significant impacts, including more heat waves and more droughts, more flooding, rising sea levels, increasing extreme weather events such as storms and hurricanes. Now, of course, those have an impact on everyone across the globe, but those impacts are not felt equally. So climate change and poverty are deeply intertwined, with climate change disproportionately affecting people in low-income communities and in developing countries. So poor people are more exposed and more vulnerable to environmental hazards, to pollution, and they have a harder time recovering. So, for example, it takes longer for a low-income community to build back after a natural disaster. Now, of course, the vast majority of accumulated greenhouse gas emissions, they're attributable to what you might call the global north, or the industrialized advanced countries, because since the Industrial Revolution, over hundreds of years, we've been producing those carbon emissions. But it's the global south, or developing countries if you prefer, that bear the heaviest consequences. And you can see that right now, is if, you know, the impacts that having those warm summers are having on us, and some of those events, well, maybe we turn up the heating or we turn on the aircon. But of course, if you're in a very poor country of the world, and you're in great poverty, even in this country actually, is, you know, harvest failure, or getting flooded, or coping with extreme temperatures, or perhaps the ill health of a family member, that can be a huge economic shock to you. So there's been recognition that there is a need to tackle this climate change, our climate emergency, for some time. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was introduced in 1994, and that was setting out that action needed to be taken to limit the future increases in temperatures. And since then, there have been a series of summits to agree how we do that. And some of these are names you will recognise. So Kyoto in 1997, and that was refreshed really with Paris in 2015. And it's particularly a good time for us to be talking about this here in the UK. Well, two reasons, UK and in the US. So in the US, the previous president pulled the US out of the Paris Agreement, and obviously the new President Biden is committed to bringing US back in. But the UK, we are hosting the next summit, so-called COP26, that's the Conference of Parties, which is going to take place in Glasgow in November of this year. That was delayed from last year. So over the last 20 years, countries have promised to cut their carbon emissions, but to date, they haven't succeeded in meeting their commitments and need to do better. And that includes us in the UK. And given that we're hosting COP26, us showing leadership and us obviously being one of the first industrialised nations is clearly important. Now, the context is that the UK Parliament in June 2019 legislated that the UK would aim to reach net zero by 2050. That means that over the next 29 years, we've got to effectively reduce our net carbon emissions to zero. And effectively, that means massively reducing the amount of carbon that we produce, although and producing a number of, if we can't, because we won't be able to completely reduce or eliminate all carbon emissions, doing some things to offset those carbon emissions so that we get to, hence why it's net zero. So an example might be planting more trees because they absorb carbon dioxide. That's an offsetting. So in the UK, the last Labour government in 2008 passed the Climate Change Act. That set up the Climate Change Committee. That's an independent statutory body which advises the UK government and the devolved governments on what steps they need to take. It sets targets for reducing carbon emissions and it reports annually to Parliament on progress. So they've produced reports in the last year, but when Boris Johnson became the Prime Minister, they set out what the 5 key priorities should be for the UK to reduce emissions. So the first one is buildings. That's making buildings more energy efficient, for example, by insulating them, so you use less energy to keep them comfortable, and eliminating the use of fossil fuels in heating buildings. So obviously no more gas boilers. The second one is transport, and obviously they pushed the government to ban the sale of new petrol and diesel cars, which has now been brought forward to 2030, but that's not the only form of transport that needs to be decarbonised. Electricity was identified. We need to generate our electricity without using coal and gas, and that means things like offshore wind development. Decarbonising industry, so that's reducing emissions from all sorts of industry and manufacturing and building, and devising new technologies, so investing in hydrogen and looking at carbon capture and storage. And then finally, agriculture, reducing emissions from agriculture, and also how are we going to deliver the millions of trees, new trees planted that was promised. Now, it isn't just about cutting carbon emissions. We recognise that we're already facing a climate crisis. Our climate is already changing. Temperatures have already increased. And so we also need adaptation because of climate change, because it's a here and now thing. So that's things like action to reduce flood risk, measures to manage extreme heat, and action to reduce the risks of drought. Now you can see immediately why those sorts of priorities and that sort of action is going to impact on every single one of us and our lives, and of course even more potentially if we don't do it, even more on our children. I understood Henry completely when he said that, you know, thinking about, you know, the next generation is one of the things that makes people think about it. Just a quick word about the Climate Assembly. So I used to chair the Transport Committee. I'm still a member of it. And in the last Parliament, there were 6 parliamentary select committees, cross-party bodies that are responsible for scrutinising government, who commissioned a Climate Assembly, a group of roughly 100 people from across the UK who were representative of the whole of the UK population, asking them to look at the question, okay, we've agreed as a parliament that we should meet net zero by 2050. How should we do it? And what choices do you think we should make that will be acceptable to the population? Now, I won't tell you about the conclusions of the Climate Assembly, but you can, there's loads of stuff published on that which you may be interested in, about the way in which those people, with help and support from experts and expert information, came to their decisions. And it is really interesting that they put fairness at the heart of it. They wanted to ensure that the responsibility and the impact of the measures that we need to take in order to tackle climate change don't fall disproportionately on people who are least able to do it. and that might include those who are, you know, disadvantaged in a variety of ways. Now, let me come on to the Nottingham bit before I run out of time. So obviously, every person, every place, every organisation has a role in helping us to reach that target of net zero by 2050, of meeting the challenge of climate change. Now, Nottingham itself as a city, and I should say that a lot of this stuff is going to be things about the work that the City Council is doing. I'm not a city councillor. I can't take the credit for some of this, although I have kind of worked with them on some of these issues, and I'll point you to where you can get more information. So Nottingham's already cut CO2 emissions by 41% since 2005, but it's now made a commitment to become carbon neutral, to become the UK's first carbon neutral city by 2028, which is obviously a very ambitious target. Let me just tell you a bit of some of the things that they have done in order to reach that cut of 41%. So it'll be things like installing solar panels on council homes and council buildings and schools, introducing LED energy efficient street lighting, helping people to insulate their homes, and lots of work, and I was involved in some of this, of helping people to insulate hard to insulate homes, ones that you can't do cavity wall insulation on, for example, helping people to install new boilers, investing in public transport, reducing the use of diesel and petrol cars, so investing in the tram network, investing through the city's bus company in biogas buses, introducing charging infrastructure so that people can feel confident to buy an electric car, knowing that they'll be able to charge it. Same with you know, taxis. Quite a radical action. The city in 2012 introduced the workplace parking levy, which is effectively it's a levy, a tax on employers who provide workplace parking. So that's to discourage the use of personal vehicles and encourage, and that money was what was used to invest in the tram network and public transport. So it's enabling that shift from carbon emitting transport to lower carbon more efficient transport, electrifying the council's own fleet, and they recently bought their first electric bin lorries. There's also the district heating scheme. Now, people who live in Nottingham quite easily live here for a long time and not even recognise that this exists and how radical it is. Some of you will have seen the Eastcroft Depot just off London Road, gigantic chimney, wondered what it is. That is where the waste from all our homes and from businesses, obviously really important that the city encourages recycling, but some of that waste can't be recycled and it's burnt in a giant incinerator, which obviously in and of itself would not be a positive for carbon emissions or for sustainability. But the heat is used to generate steam, which heats thousands of homes in the city through the district heating scheme, and heats many of the buildings in the city centre, including the whole of the Victoria Centre and all those hundreds of flats above it. So the district heating scheme is not something you find most places, because it's very difficult to have an incinerator that close to lots of homes, but for a variety of reasons Nottingham has one. So that's some of the examples of things they've already done. But obviously, to reach carbon neutral by 2028, and it has to be fair and sustainable, it has to improve and protect the environment, our economy and society. That's what the city's setting out to do. And they can't do that on their own. It has to be done with people, with businesses, with local organisations working together. And they've set out a framework, and I can't go for time reasons into all the detail. There are 4 sections. There's about carbon reduction, which focuses on transport, the built environment, energy generation, waste and water and consumption. There's a section on carbon removal, on resilience and adaptation, and ecology and biodiversity. And if you Google the Nottingham City Council 2028 Charter and Plan, you'll be able to read all the detail. And interestingly, just today, I saw the daily or the weekly news update from the Deputy Leader of the City Council, Councillor Sally Longford, who's a councillor in my area. That included details of a major consultation that the City Council are about to commence. They're doing that in collaboration with Nottingham Trent University's Environment Department, and they're going to be running focus groups throughout May where local people, citizens, everyone who lives in Nottingham can participate in that to share their views with the city on this target of being carbon neutral by 2028 and how we get there. So that was what I wanted to say. Hopefully I've not run too far over my time, and happy to try and answer your questions or direct you where you can find an answer if I don't know it.
Lillian, I thought that was great. Thanks very much for the overview and then diving into the detail with Nottingham there. Just to pick up on a point that you made at the end about people sharing their own views and helping influence how Nottingham gets to 2028. How is it that you work with local government, and how do people interact with you to give you their ideas about how to address climate change?
Well, obviously, I've had loads of contact with my constituents concerned about climate change, and sometimes that's by groups who are, whose raison d'etre is, about climate action. So, climate activists like Extinction Rebellion. Sometimes it's through people who've got a particular interest in a particular area. So we can, obviously I always listen to those issues, take those issues into Parliament, participate in those debates. I have regular meetings with a whole range of partner organisations in the city, including the City Council, our universities, businesses. And obviously, because it's a shared endeavour to reach net zero, but also it's a huge opportunity. There's an enormous potential for not only for Nottingham to be leading the way, but this to be creating obviously the jobs and industries of the future. Nottingham, in part, is a city that was built on some industries that either no longer exist or no longer exist in the UK. So coal mining, cigarette manufacture, bicycle manufacture. For a variety of reasons, none of those three are now the basis of Nottingham, but our universities are clearly an important part of our industry, and the opportunities of green energy, green development is a really important part of the future of our city. And so that's a regular discussion with a whole range of people, and always happy to talk to groups and individuals about those issues.
And just picking up an earlier point about planting trees and that being a measure to offset carbon as opposed to reducing it, by 2028, Nottingham won't have reduced to zero carbon. It will be using offset measures. Is that right? And what would those offset measures look like? Because I guess in Nottingham City, you're not going to be planting a significant amount of trees that would be doing that offsetting job.
Well, I think, eliminating all carbon emissions is a really difficult thing to do, especially in the next 7 years. So there is going to be some offsetting. Obviously, if you want to get to net zero as a country as well, we recognise that there's going to have to be some measures that are reducing, that are not just reducing, it's not just about eliminating carbon emissions, it's about the things that we can do to balance that. It is about the importance of green and open spaces. It's about, and it isn't just about creating more parks or growing more trees. It is also about how we use the land that we've got, how we manage the spaces that we've got. You'll have seen, perhaps if you're driving around the ring road in the last year, that some spaces have been left put to wildflowers to encourage bees, and the city wants to be bee friendly, reducing the use of pesticides, reducing the use of water, encouraging when new buildings are being built for them to be including green roofs and things like that. So there are lots of ways in which the city can be part of that, even though we're a very densely urban area.
Okay, there's a couple in the chat. I've got a question from Colin O'Brien Lux. One of the criticisms of carbon targets is they're used to generate positive press, but often forgotten and unenforced. So ultimately aren't as helpful as a mechanism as we'd hope. What are your thoughts on that? And are there any ideas on how to improve enforcement?
Well, obviously, that's absolutely right. There's no point having a target if you constantly miss it. And that is where, you know, at a national level, that's the importance of the Committee on Climate Change's work, and why it provides progress reports to Parliament, so that when government are failing to stay on track, as they currently are, there's a lot of pressure on them to take urgent action to address it, and to take action sooner. So when the government sort of, now I'm trying to think how many years ago it is now, introduced their first view about when they would eliminate petrol and diesel, the sale of petrol and diesel cars, they were originally talking about 2040, and it was only as a result of a lot of pressure, of campaigning, of holding them to account, that finally they've now reduced that to 2030. So I mean, that is the purpose, you know, that's what all of us have a role in ensuring, that there's political pressure to make sure that those targets are not just used as rhetoric. And you'll have seen that the announcement from the Prime Minister, I think it was just yesterday, saying, you know, aiming to reduce total UK carbon emissions by 80% sooner. But that's only going to be meaningful if it actually happens, isn't it? And that's what all of our job, well, my job as an MP is holding the government to account for the promises it makes, and all of you will be holding, I'm sure, the City Council and people like me to account for the promises that we make.
I've got one more in the chat, so I'm going to say the name wrong probably, so apologies, but Francois says, I've noticed we have a bus network running on biomethane, so I think this is going to play on your transport background, but we don't currently collect organic waste to create biomethane in Nottingham. Why not?
I wish I knew the answer to that, Francois, so I apologise for not knowing. I'm not sure our bus network runs on biomethane, but I may be wrong. That's a good question. I shall go away and find out the answer to that, because I don't know the answer.
Okay, and then finally, just to finish off Q&A, you mentioned COP26. What does a good COP26 look like from your perspective?
I think it's where there's that they're actually able to reach an agreement and a consensus on what action is necessary, and with, you know, the maximum number of countries signing up to targets, and then actually involving the action that they're going to take to meet those targets. And we'll all be looking really closely ahead of COP26 and holding the government to account for the leadership they're providing, but is going to require international cooperation. I mean, that is the whole point, isn't it, to actually get there.
And chances of success of that agreement? Well,
let's be optimistic. I don't know. I mean, we've had, you know, we've seen, I've seen a number of the summits over recent years, which have either not ended in success, or have, you know, it's fallen apart afterwards, even though initially it looked promising. But this is only becoming more urgent. The longer we fail to cut carbon to address the climate crisis, the more serious it becomes, and the more actually it's already getting worse and requires greater adaptations. So there is the need to do it now.
Okay, I think that was a brilliant opening presentation. Thanks very much for taking the time to join us. I know you've got a very busy schedule. So yeah, thanks again. Everyone's clapping in the background. You just can't hear because everyone's muted. But I'm going to pass over now to Darryl Young. So Darryl serves as director of the Summit Foundation's Sustainable Cities Programme, and he'll be providing our US perspective on sustainable cities and communities. He's a trustee of the Transit Centre Foundation. He's on the steering committee of the Climate and Energy Funders, and a board member of the Reloop platform, which is an international non-profit that brings together industry, government, and NGOs who share a vision of a thriving global circular economy. Lots of fingers and lots of pies. So Darryl will be giving an overview of the most recent changes to US sustainability policy brought on by the recent change in administration. He'll shed some light on the nuances of passing legislation through the Senate, and then he'll be diving into some details about Boulder, which is a city of just 100,000 people in Colorado, but one that's punching well above its weight when it comes to sustainability credentials, evidenced by its membership of the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, which is a club of ambitious cities from around the world aiming to achieve carbon neutrality in the next 10 to 20 years. So over to you, Darryl, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be able to speak at your first event. I first off would like to start with an apology. We have a dodgy history in the United States of helping to negotiate commitments and then not keeping them, walking away from them. So what do I mean by that? The Kyoto Accord, which was an agreement, was not ratified within the United States. That was thanks to George W. Bush. And then we had our president, Donald Trump. I want to apologize for his abandonment of the Paris Climate Accord. We wasted everyone's time. We lost time in making progress. The administration denied that science existed. And we have a lot to atone for. And we have hope that this administration and future administrations will carry on the mantle of our work on climate. My message to you is trust, but consistently verify and challenge. As we come back to Paris, do not let us get away with the mistakes that we've made in the past. We do not get to take the stage without significant commitments and meeting those commitments. I will say one good thing about Donald Trump was that he signed a COVID measure in December, which allocated a significant amount of money to spending on wind, solar, and other clean power sources. The bill, which was not of his making, but he did sign out of desperation to address the COVID crisis, also included curtailing and phasing out the use of hydrofluorocarbons. That's a big word. HCFs are the chemical that's used for air conditioners and refrigerators. And so we've now joined so many other countries that have committed to change the way we heat and cool our buildings using HCF. So if there's anything to be said, the Trump administration managed to unknowingly, unwittingly do some actually okay things. It does not make up for the whole variety of challenges that have been created by our being absent. Let me turn a little bit to the Biden administration and what has been achieved through that. Let me go to that next slide. Hang on. I want to get. This is not working for some reason. Here we go. There we go. Biden commitments. So let's just talk a little about what the Biden administration is committed to do. The first thing that President Biden did was he signed a series of executive orders. His commitment during his election was to get us back into the Paris Agreement. And in fact, we are now back into the Paris Agreement. How that manifests itself remains to be seen. The administration, I think either today or tomorrow, will announce that we will make a national commitment. Every country makes a commitment for what it will do towards contributing to reduction of GHG. It is reported and likely from people I've talked to in the administration that the president tomorrow, as part of a climate summit that he's holding as part of Earth Day, will commit the United States to 50% by 2030, 50% reduction in GHG. Britain and England is far ahead of that, as you heard earlier from the commitments that London is making, the commitments that England is making. Among the other orders that the president has signed is that he has freezed federal leases on oil and gas production. What does that mean? Within the United States, 22% of oil production and 12% of gas production is held on federal land. So it is a significant commitment to stop oil and gas production, which doesn't exacerbate the problem. Now, having said that, the United States has made major commitments to natural gas, which remains a continual problem. Other things that the administration has done is that they have committed to actually using science in the decisions that they're making. I know it seems hard to believe that you'd have an administration that ignored science, but science is back in the multitude of agencies responsible for climate. And that's another element that the president has made not one agency, all agencies responsible for their decisions as it relates to GHG reduction and climate. Let me also say that in the most recent relief measure, the COVID relief measure that the administration signed, there was a unheralded or heretofore unheard of notion that the federal government in a bipartisan way is committing money for transit, not just in terms of building infrastructure or building more bus stops, but actually for operating transit during this period of COVID. That is a watershed moment that will play out in the remainder of the year as we start talking about infrastructure, as we start talking about reauthorization of funding for transit. And we know that within the United States, transit and biking and walking are significant areas of improvement that need to happen. Now, part of that is part of the $2 trillion, which is 1.4 trillion pounds, infrastructure proposal that the administration has made. It includes things like 100% clean electricity generation by 2035, funding for that. It also includes funding for expanding wind and solar power and also a nationwide system of electric car charging. Those are good. What we can deploy now, what we can do immediately is to increase the frequency of transit. So while we are electrifying the bus fleet, we're moving beyond methane or methane. We are moving to electrification. It does no good to have an electric bus if it never arrives, if it only comes once an hour. Our goal is to have bus service every 10 minutes, or like Crossrail in London, every 25 seconds another train is coming. That's what we should be aiming for. Let me talk a little bit about the political ramifications of where we are in the House. This $2 trillion measure will not take effect unless it is passed by both the Senate and the House. In the House, the Democrats have a 3-vote margin. That means they have 3 votes that are necessary of the total number to be able to pass anything. So if this infrastructure proposal is to move forward, if this climate-focused infrastructure is to move forward, it's going to require a big grassroots effort to ensure that all members of Congress that are Democrats and also Republicans are going to vote for it. In the Senate, it is even worse. There is an even split of 50-50. Of the 100 members of the Senate, 50 are Democrats, 50 are Republicans. The tie can be broken by the vice president. But to do that requires a significant amount of legislative wrangling. There's a process you may have heard of called reconciliation. We don't have enough time to explain what reconciliation is. Save it to say that it can only be used once or twice during the year. And it's going to be something we're going to need to do if we're going to realize our dreams. The commitments cannot happen unless it's funded. The funding is the issue at hand. The president has suggested that the funding for our climate activities are in part going to be funded by increased taxes among corporations. If you'll remember, under the Trump administration, a significant tax cut was levied, one that really was unable to be fathomed from a financial standpoint. So what the Biden administration is talking about is increasing or replacing to a more reasonable level of taxation. The biggest challenge is going to be with regards to infrastructure in the United States is exactly what is infrastructure. There was a very broad definition under this administration. It includes social infrastructure. It includes a whole host of things beyond bridges, roads, solar, and wind. Let me talk a little bit about now where are cities going in the United States? What are the cities doing in the United States? The Summit Foundation has supported a variety of institutions and networks to do peer learning and peer sharing of knowledge, and then peer innovation. Of the 3 institutions that we submit, that we support, the networks, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network initially was 15 people that was created out of some funding from the Obama administration for energy retrofits and energy efficiency. At the time, it was 15 people. Fast forward now, it is over 220 North American cities with roughly 2,000 members of urban sustainability professionals sharing, innovating, and leading. Within that group, the high-performing cities decided that there was so much that could be learned by European and international cities and what they were doing. And there was a hunger by international cities to also participate with other cities. So we were the inaugural investors in the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, which initially was a very limited number of cities. You had to be taken in, and you had to apply. You had to show both a political commitment as well as a financial commitment to seriously reducing carbon and make a political commitment to carbon neutrality. We were able to identify, or they were able to identify, that there are roughly 23 cities across the world that are the high-performing vanguard cities. And then the other group that we've supported lightly is a group called the C40 Cities, which was established by the Bloomberg administration, by the Bloomberg Foundation. Those are mainly mayors and supporting their aspiration, not necessarily requiring commitments, but supporting their aspiration. A good group. If C40 is the Navy, CNCA is the Navy SEALs. So it has London in it, it has Stockholm, it has Amsterdam. It also has a small city like Boulder, Colorado. You'd say, well, what is a 100,000 person city doing in a large set of cities that are doing so much work? It's because Boulder has had made a personal commitment, a financial commitment, and they've been able to overcome the political inertia that often exists in larger cities. And they have moved forward and tried a variety of things. They have contributed to thinking. So one of the areas in Nottingham is the energy sprong. Nottingham is one of the first cities in the UK to develop and to try retrofitting houses while people are still living in those houses by cladding those houses with a much higher level of efficiency. And the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance took some of that information from Amsterdam and from the Dutch model, and then informed a whole variety of cities about how would that work. And I'm happy to say that Nottingham is one of the leading cities around energy sprong as a way of mass retrofitting. So that's the kind of work. Boulder also examined that, and Boulder was very much involved in that. Let me talk a little bit about the city commitments. There has been a commitment by cities for some time to reduce the amount of carbon they have, but we've commissioned a study which shows that the number of cities that are participating and their ability to meet their goals are simply not succeeding. You know, in a somewhat sanguine and circumspect way, the city of Boulder was the first city to say, we are not succeeding, we are indeed failing. And they said that to their city council, staff said that to city council. And what it led them to realize was that they needed a larger systemic approach, that it cannot be done by simply voluntary commitments and simply by citizen change, by change of residents. That's important, it's a part of it, but it requires a restructuring of a variety of economic systems. It requires a restructuring of the way municipalities interface with the utilities and with systems of control, including things like transit. That is one reason why Boulder was ahead of the curve and why Boulder was included, because their ability to be frank and admit that their commitments were not being met was important. To give you a sense of the impact of city commitments in the United States, there are roughly 20,000 US cities in the United States. And the cities that are participating are very limited. They are mainly large urban areas with democratic leadership. And there is minimal support. There's minimal support, almost no support for smaller, poor, and rural communities. Indeed, 92% of local governments are not participating. So we need to reach out in a larger way. Now that the federal government is back, we're hoping that the stimulus money will move us forward and be able to get us to where we need to go. And building on the Boulder memo, we think it's an opportunity for the United States to move forward. We have so much work to do. A last thing I'll offer to you is that I think Nottingham should try to join the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. They are aligning money, resources, and knowledge, and they've loosened the requirements for membership. And in many ways, just knowing what I know about Nottingham, I did a little bit of reading, I think it's an opportunity for you not only to demonstrate your notoriety within the UK, but also internationally, and to be a model. I'll give you one example of where the UK has been a model. The Transport for London people, specifically people like Ben Plowden, have really changed the way people think about transportation in the United States, in terms of tendering, in terms of frequency, in terms of operations. And now it's gotten to the point where TfL, Transport for London, is actually performing a consultancy service for cities in India and also in the United States. I think that the knowledge that you generate has the capacity to also generate consultancy work in other cities which are hungering for the knowledge that you're developing. And I'll just leave it at that. And I'm open to questions.
That's great, Darryl. Thanks very much. Just to get us off the mark, you mentioned about Biden pledging to bring the US back to rejoin the Paris Agreement. Do you think that was a major factor in his re-election? So is sustainability something that the man or woman on the street is engaged with in the States, and they would have seen that and hooked onto that?
Yeah, here's what's changed. For the first time, you've seen an alignment. The racial equity and class equity issues that have always been existent is merging with the climate goals. So the equity and climate and race and class issues are coming together. So you found a newfound group of audience and an active audience of groups like the Sunrise Movement and election of individuals like AOC and old hands that have worked on these issues like Bernie. And those issues have helped to create a movement. I think that the administration recognized if they were going to get elected, they needed to show real commitments to those audiences. And so far, not bad. The left has had a really good opportunity to condition who does get into service. And what we've seen for the first time is a selflessness. There are so often within federal administrations or within any administration, I've worked in an administration, people want large fancy offices with big phalanxes of staff. You've got people who are former heads of the Environmental Protection Agency. You've got people who are the former Secretary of State taking very discrete roles in playing an important role. So I think what you're seeing now is a genuine, sanguine commitment. Whether or not that administration commitment translates to more conservative elements within the United States remains to be seen. But I think there's hope there. You know, one of the groups we're funding is a group called the Democracy Collaborative, and I know that they've worked with labor in the Preston model, trying to do some community wealth building. There's a climate relationship to that. So for the first time, climate, equity, and class are coming together that I think will lead to a much stronger and more dedicated commitment. The last thing I'll say about that is we have a history of having one elected official, then another elected official purposefully undoing what has been done by the previous elected. In some instances, that doesn't happen in the UK. I mean, I've watched London and the way that they've dealt with congestion pricing and the way that they've done with zero emission zones, you know, from Ken Livingstone on, those mayors have built on each other. And so what we're hoping to do is have the same thing exist, not only within cities, but also within national commitments.
Tied to that, I think, actually, I've got a question from Judy Ong. So you obviously feel, I've just lost that. You obviously feel very personally about past political decisions made to pull out of international agreements. Could it be that the grassroots movements and dreams have grown stronger because of those actions?
Yeah, I think the level of disappointment has caused people to, well, first of all, let me just say that younger people are involved and they are holding accountable people who have failed them. And I think that the series of interlocking disasters, both natural and economic, that are tied to climate is becoming more evident and real. So when you have the oil industry talking about, well, we're trying to help on climate, for example, we're doing natural gas, I think the public is seeing through that advertising the traditional propaganda modes have started to fall and fail within corporate entities. Not all are bad, but I also think that the traditional green groups are having to recalibrate and change the way they did their work. The last thing I'll say is that much of the political wins in the last year, including in Georgia, were not based on traditional green groups, but they were based on a race class alignment to build democratic institutions to be able to elect 2 Democratic senators that shifted the balance on where we could go. So I see that that's an opportunity. Past commitments being failed, I don't think we want a third time of that.
Good to hear. I'm going to finish on the last question. I'm conscious that we're coming up to the end of the hour, but same as I pass on to Lillian, what does a successful COP26 look like for you?
I think it's already started. The ground success are there by the NDC, the national commitments by England, to be, was it, I think it was 80%. I think it will make the 50% commitment we're making look silly. The challenge about the success of the COP, it's not enough to make a commitment. How are you going to pay for it? And that was one of the problems we had at Paris, is that there were all kinds of notions that we were going to have technology, which is one solution, but it's not the only solution. We have to change the economic system that we operate under, because they in themselves are not sustainable. That's a long-winded answer to say, I think there's chance for success. Success is a function of commitments coming that are real. And I wouldn't say that they're punitive, but they certainly are time-bound, and bad things happen if you don't do them beyond the natural disaster that we face.
Okay. Thanks very much, Darryl. It's been great to have you join us. Really appreciate the time you've given up and joining us last night for the prep as well. I'm going to pass over to Sam, who's going to close out for us.
Thanks, Henry. I expect a lot of you will have to get off pretty soon, so I'll keep closing comments nice and concise. Firstly, just to echo thanks to both our speakers tonight, Lillian and Darryl. I couldn't imagine a better pair to kick off our sustainability series. And thanks especially to Darryl for travelling so many thousands of virtual miles to be here and taking some time out of your working day, because it's only 2 p.m. where you are. And secondly, thank you to our returning scholars, Sheridan for holding the digital reins tonight, and Tom for producing the amazing graphics that you may have seen on social media. And then, yeah, just last thing, thanks to you all for joining us. We'd absolutely love if you stuck around for some optional networking now. But if not, we hope to see you back here next time for our second sustainability talk. But the very last thing, do have a look at our website and consider applying if you're eligible. And if not, please just tell everyone you know ever about the scholarship. Thank you.